Close your eyes and imagine New York City in 1857. The streets are narrow, clogged with horse carts and trash. Tall tenements rise crooked over crooked alleys. The smell of coal smoke, spilled beer, and unwashed humanity hangs heavy in the humid summer air. This city is booming, but it is also bursting at the seams. Poverty and wealth sit side by side. The immigrant Irish of the 5 Points scrape through life just blocks away from the parlor rooms of Broadway. Industry surges, but so too does corruption. And beneath this fragile surface, gangs thrive. Some are rowdy neighborhood clubs, others are nationalists with torches and fists. But in 1857, New York witnessed something that burned itself into legend. A battle so chaotic that the streets of Lower Manhattan turned into a war zone. It was the infamous Dead Rabbits Riot, a 48-hour melee where hundreds clashed, police were beaten, and order collapsed until the state militia arrived with bayonets. Tonight, we will slip gently into that story, not with the noise of a modern crime drama, but with the whisper of history told for sleep. From the origins of the Dead Rabbits gang itself, to their rivals the Bowery Boys, to the riots of July 1857 and the shattered peace that followed. History can be gritty, but told slowly, it also lulls us as a world of flickering lantern light, cobblestone echoes, and faint footsteps down alleys long gone. So settle in, rest, and let New York of the 19th century rise before your mind's eye, flickering like an old engraving come to life.
To understand the riot, we must walk first into 5 Points, the slum of slums, infamous across the nation by the 1820s. Once a pond, drained and filled, it left behind unstable earth, rotting timber, sinking tenements crammed with families and lodgers. By mid-century, 5 Points was an overcrowded stew of poverty, desperation, and determination. For the Irish immigrants who fled famine across the ocean, the 5 Points was both refuge and prison. Here arose the first formal street gangs of New York, the 40 Thieves, the Carryonians, and in the decades that followed, the Dead Rabbits. The name itself is the kind of legend only gangs can inspire. One story tells of a brawl where a dead rabbit was flung onto the tavern floor. A band of fighters lifted it high like a banner and proudly adopted the insult. Another story claims it was Irish slang, meaning a tough fellow. In either case, the name stuck. The Dead Rabbits were Irish street toughs, drawn not just to mischief, but to identity. The Bowery Boys, native-born Protestants, looked down on them as drunken intruders. In return, the Irish Dead Rabbits saw themselves as warriors of the 5 Points, fighting not only for turf, but for pride. Their clashes with the Bowery Boys grew legendary. By the 1850s, the city knew well that where Bowery met 5 Points, fists would fly, bricks would shatter, and knives would glint in the torchlight.
The Bowery Boys were as distinctive as the Rabbits. Their uniforms stuck in the eye, red firemen's shirts, stovepipe hats battered from fights, boots tucked into trousers. Many were volunteer firefighters, proud of their role as New York's native sons. They paraded through the Bowery with swagger, striking poses, their slang brash, their fists quick. They had their own code and saw themselves as defenders of Americanism, as opposed to what they viewed as the foreign Irish hordes. Their political leaning was nativist, the know-nothing movement, with little tolerance for immigrants crowding their streets. When they clashed with the Irish gangs of 5 Points, it was more than a fight. It was native versus newcomer, Protestant versus Catholic, and with politics as fiery as personal rivalry. Between them and the Irish gangs, turf was claimed with fists, paving stones, cudgels, and sometimes pistols. Taverns became clubhouses, and every street corner held the promise of a brawl. The city's underfunded and faction-ridden police could do little but try to keep up.
The year 1857 was one of chaos for New York. The economy faltered, riots struck over politics, labor unrest seethed, and confidence in the institutions of law collapsed. To make matters worse, the city even had two competing police forces, the old municipal police and the new metropolitan police, sometimes fighting each other in the streets. Amid this confusion, the gangs thrived. That July, tension boiled to a peak. On July 4th, Independence Day, the Bowery Boys and their allies clashed with the Dead Rabbits along Bayard Street. Fists, knives, paving stones, and bricks flew until night fell and the gangs retreated. The next day, July 5th, the Dead Rabbits returned in force, determined not just to clash, but to march boldly into enemy territory. What followed was 2 days of anarchy. Hundreds of gang members crowded the streets. Banners were raised, clubs and bricks were wielded. Wave after wave of Dead Rabbits surged into Bowery territory, and Bowery Boys countercharged. The fighting spilled across Baxter, Mulberry, and Worth streets. Barricades of carts and barrels were pulled across streets as if this were Paris in revolution, not New York. The fighting was so fierce that even the police were beaten back. According to newspapers, a lone officer who attempted to arrest a gang leader was dragged down, stripped, and nearly killed by the mob. Dry statistics are one thing. The reality, windows smashed, shop fronts looted, wounded men left groaning on sidewalks, was something else altogether.
By the morning of July 5th, the riot had ballooned. Dead Rabbits gathered by the hundreds, armed with clubs and pistols, reinforced by allied gangs. They marched with a crude banner of a dead rabbit impaled on a pike. Grisly, absurd, but a powerful gang symbol of defiance. The Bowery Boys rallied their own. The fighting seesawed block by block. When the Dead Rabbits charged, they drove the Bowery Boys backwards. When fresh Bowery reinforcements arrived, the 5 Points men were pushed back in turn. From rooftops, bricks and stones showered down on whichever side advanced below. Every charge and retreat left blood on the cobblestones. The police, split between rival departments, faltered. The first squad that attempted to intervene was overwhelmed and literally beaten off the field. Only when larger forces gathered did they begin to press the mob back. Even then, the roar of gangs drowned their whistles. Finally, by evening, the fragile line of order collapsed, and the only choice remained: to summon the National Guard. The National Guard arrives. By late July 5th, militias arrived. The 8th and 71st Regiments of the National Guard marched down the Bowery, bayonets fixed. Cannons were hauled into place at strategic intersections. Soldiers patrolled through the alleyways and tore down barricades. The mob, for all its ferocity, could not stand against disciplined gun barrels. Slowly, the Dead Rabbits scattered back toward 5 Points, and the Bowery Boys melted into their saloons. For 2 full days, parts of Lower Manhattan had been in gang control. At least 8 were dead, perhaps more, dozens wounded, and countless beaten. Rumors swirled of bodies quietly buried away or slipped into rivers at night. The Dead Rabbits Riot became notorious not just for its scale, but because it proved how weak the city's institutions truly were. When gangs could command hundreds into battle, overwhelm police, and require the military to restore peace, something fundamental about order in 19th century New York was laid bare. Legacy of the Dead Rabbits Riot. The Dead Rabbits Riot of 1857 burned itself into legend. The Bowery Boys, bruised but still strutting, went on fighting for years. The Dead Rabbits themselves declined by the 1860s, but Irish gangs spawned anew under new banners. Eventually, another great war, the Draft Riots of 1863, would dwarf even this bloodshed, with mobs rampaging for days. But the Dead Rabbits Riot remained remembered as New York's great gang battle, the day when 5 Points fury and Bowery pride turned into open war. Later chroniclers made the Rabbits folk heroes, fighters for Irish pride. Others saw them as little more than hooligans with blood on their boots. Both views walked side by side, as myth and history often do. What we can say is that July 1857 captured the raw truth of 19th century New York, that beneath the wealth of Wall Street and the grand avenues, the city's underbelly pulsed with immigrant hunger, nativist fury, and fiery gangs willing to crack skulls for identity.
And so we leave the cobblestones of 1857 behind, the bruised fists, the smoke, and the eerie sound of whistles drowned by mob roars. The Dead Rabbits Riot was violent, chaotic, even absurd. Yet it was also history in raw form, a city bursting through its poverty and prejudice in the only language many knew then, the language of fists and clubs. As you drift towards sleep tonight, remember that history carries not just stories of kings and presidents, but also of nameless men in stovepipe hats and ragged coats, clashing in torchlight over pride, community, and belonging. Rest now, knowing the gangs are long gone, the streets repaved, the cobblestones silent once more. If you found this journey through time compelling, soft in tone, yet rich in story, consider subscribing to the channel, leaving a like, and perhaps sharing your own corner of history in the comments. Every gesture helps keep these stories ad-free and alive for nights to come. Good night, and may your dreams be gentler than the Dead Rabbits Riot.